Can it run Crysis? The lowest hanging fruit of all. Well, we originally did a trilogy of videos for these games, and they were surprising on Nintendo Switch 1, but had obvious caveats. I've had the game sat on my memory card for the last week or so, and have gradually been building up a body of footage for this very video. So, can it run? Nah, let's not bother. How does it run on Switch 2? Well, my name's Mark Walker, welcome back to SwitchUp. Now let's find out. So this episode was sponsored by Rokid AR Spatial, which is the Rokid Max 2 glasses and the Rokid Station 2. I've been using this for about a month and man, it's pretty damn sweet. Essentially what it is when you plug in the Station 2 is it's an augmented reality space. So you can have up to 3 different applications running on this system. You can change the sizes of those screens to narrow, wide and ultra wide, and you can also go into theatre mode so that it takes up the whole view and you can adjust it from there. The screen is up to 300 inches, it's absolutely massive. And while you can use it for things like Netflix streaming, Disney Plus, all that good stuff, I've actually found that by installing things like the GeForce Now app or using the browser, I can actually be playing like fully fledged PC games by pairing up a controller, all the while watching a YouTube video or pretending to do some work. It does have a built-in diopter adjustment. This comes in the form of a little wheel so that you can essentially tailor the glasses and their lenses to your own eyes, and they weigh just 75 grams, which is a bit of a difference, isn't it? From something like the Apple Vision Pro, which weighs almost a kilogram, has a lower refresh rate, and yeah, I believe that costs almost 5 times as much. You can use these anywhere, use them in bed, and actually that's one time where it's very handy not to create loads of noise and light. They do have built-in speakers by your ear, and you can actually just plug them directly into your mobile phone and both screens will be active, so it's a really handy way of watching your content. I think Rokid were founded in 2014. This is their 3rd generation product, and it really does show how far they've come. For SwitchUp exclusively, we've got, I think, a discount code that covers the first 1,000 orders, who will also receive a free game controller. And yeah, of course you can use these, plug them directly into your Switch console with an adapter and play your games that way. Happy days. Thanks to Rokid for sponsoring this episode. Let's start with the original Nintendo Switch 1 performance analysis.
The game appears to be using a form of dynamic resolution scaling, but overall it's running at a decent screen resolution with not a great deal of blurring taking place. It's targeting 30 FPS, and I say targeted, it's not locked out at 30. There are quite a few dips. Now, at the beginning of the game, it's very smooth and it's all 30, and most of it's very well handled with good frame pacing. However, I noticed that when it all starts to kick off, for example when you get to control a tank or you're fighting anything where there's going to be lots of physics being used and CPU intensive processes, you can get a little bit of hitching, and you also get quite a dip in the frame rates. I think I managed to get it down to around about 22 FPS, but it is nice to still see those crepuscular rays, those god rays shining down through the clouds. And for a handheld console, the texture resolution is by no means the worst I've seen on Switch. It's not amazing, but the presentation's pretty good. Much of the foliage remains intact and has the ability to be shot in half. It will move when players pass through them, but I did notice the animation range for foliage is a little shorter than perhaps you'd be used to if you played a souped up version of the original. LOD bias, or level of detail bias, is also set quite close to the player. You can shift your player forwards and backwards and quite noticeably see areas where items' LOD is suddenly improving and they almost pop into clarity after being much lower detailed assets.
So then we typically have between 720p to 900p when it was docked. I do think it's a shame that they didn't set that to 1080p. As we'll see, it causes slight limitations when you're doing the Nintendo Switch 2, but one thing I didn't initially discuss a great deal was the frame pacing. In fact, I glossed straight over it and said, yeah, the frame pacing is absolutely fine. It wasn't. I just didn't really know what I was talking about at the time because I didn't have frame pace analysis software, which we do have now. Also in handheld mode, the resolutions ranged from 400p all the way up to 720p. It meant that the dynamic resolution scaling could cause a few visual dips. There were certain areas like the big tank battle that absolutely chugged as well, and anything like explosions could bring that frame rate tumbling down. Still, for what it was running on, that being the early Tegra chipset, it was impressive, and I think all of us were quite pleased to see it because it meant something bigger for Switch in terms of third-party support. So then let's begin with the easier to run early parts of the game on Nintendo Switch 1. Well, as you can see, 30 frames per second becomes the norm, as does 32 millisecond frame time, which is the absolute ideal. However, on the Nintendo Switch 2, we do have a couple of issues. The first of them, and it was pertinent to the first game, is that you may very occasionally experience a crash. Now, I experienced one on boot, and I also experienced one in late game areas. However, this isn't new. This was something that was also present on the original Crysis release when playing on the Switch 1. Performance-wise though, that 30 frames per second is definitely more consistent. The problems like explosive areas, environmental effects causing slowdown, these seem to be all but non-existent on Switch 2. A great example is literally standing inside a building and then, well, just tossing a hand grenade to see what will happen to the performance, and as you can see, it remains very consistent when you think that this would originally have gone down to 15 to 20 frames per second. Now, not only that, but the game doesn't scale that resolution, so rather than it dropping from 900p down to as low as 540p, it doesn't do that anymore even when there are explosives going off, meaning everything's crisper. Now, it does not improve my aiming, I'm still absolutely shocking, but it's a better experience in that regard. The other most taxing area, as I say, was the large tank battle. Now, one area that we do see with the Crytek CryEngine are problems when you move to Switch 2 with frame pacing. It's not something that we've seen so much with the Unreal Engine. That seems to work out its frame times a little better. CryEngine, not so much, and as you can see here, every now and then you'll see fluctuation spikes in frame time up to 49 and then a little bit below, and those are visible with the naked eye as well. You will see those. Feels almost like a short loading pause, just a minor micro stutter, but it does affect the overall feeling of smoothness sometimes. I think it's fair to say that those are few and far between compared to the original release. Slap upside the head to young Mark Walker. And when we jump over to handheld mode in the most taxing area again, despite the fact I can't drive a tank for toffee, performance is maintained. Now, in handheld, we were looking at anywhere between 540p and 720p. Interesting that the handheld could meet native resolution, but now that on Switch 2, the emulation software actually upscales that 720 to meet the native 1080p resolution, and that can cause its own blurriness. With that said, maxing out its visual resolution to 720 and then scaling it does look okay, doesn't it? And you won't see those drops down to 540p, and I think even without a patch, it's surprisingly passable. Visual fidelity, well, on CryEngine, that's going to remain unchanged. It's really based on the settings that the developers have chosen to implement here. Will it look sharper because of the resolution? Yes, of course, when we look side by side. You're going to see a big sharpness bump on Switch 2, but the actual texture resolutions will not change, and they were slightly muddy for Switch. They brought those right down, as were things like draw distance, so level of detail draw distance on small environmental objects, many of which did have physical properties. They're still quite close to the player, so you may see a little bit of pop-in, objects materializing into display, but having played these back to back, it is much better. The improved resolution will also have the knock-on effect of reducing the amount of aliasing on the edges of objects. Obviously, we cannot change anisotropic filtering, so that texture sharpness at a draw distance past 10 or so feet in front of the player, well, you can see it. In fact, you can even see the line where the anisotropic filtering drops off, and the quality just becomes, and I'm not going to say Vaseline because I've said it so much recently, more blurry, shall we say. Load times do see a significant bump, as we would expect across the board. And we're already starting to get used to the increased load speeds of the Switch 2 memory. And PS, if you're like me, desperately searching for a larger capacity memory card, a company called ADATA ADATA, I think, something along those lines, has finally got stock on their 512GB model. You can find it in a few different places if you're fast enough, because yeah, running out of storage is becoming real on Switch 2. Another aspect that feels slightly improved on Switch 2 across the board whenever using it are the gyroscopic controls. It will be interesting to see whether the Switch 2 is using the exact same components, because it could well be as far as gyro is concerned. It doesn't seem to drift as much, and also with the improved performance you tend to feel like you have more control over the cursor. Again, make sure you switch off auto aiming, because I haven't in some of these and it's messing me up. The conclusion really for Crysis Remastered is that if you're considering reloading it onto your Switch or Switch 2, well, after patches and bits and bobs it runs well enough, but on Switch 2 you're looking at 30 FPS, some slight frame pacing issues, but a much sharper image across the board while not being native. I hope this was of some use. I hope you enjoyed it. I do enjoy making these. A thank you to our Patreons, our members. Do keep your eye out for the next episode. Obviously we have the whole trilogy. We actually did a dedicated video covering performance for each and every one, which is handy. For all things Switch, all the time, keep it Switch up. Cheers guys, see ya!